My wife wanted a divorce and laughed. Because I had no lawyer, but in court, she froze. Part 1. I didn't hear the storm until the envelope spoke. It lay on our hallway table like a white brick, my name typed across it in a font that knew how to keep its hands clean. The window rattled, late summer rain shivering down the glass, and still that envelope was the loudest thing in the room. I knew the feeling. I've watched quiet kids hold entire classrooms hostage with a single folded note. When I slid a thumb beneath the flap, the house seemed to lean closer. The words inside were the language of undoing, petition, dissolution, equitable distribution, as if a life could be taken apart with the same tidy verbs used for furniture assembly. And then there was the number. 70% of our savings, the house, 5 years of alimony. A list that read like a heist. Alina was at the kitchen island in a silk robe the color of thunderheads right before they burst. Her nails were carmine commas resting on the marble. She didn't look up as I read. She knew what was in the envelope. It was her envelope. "Marcus," she said at last, smoothing an invisible wrinkle that wasn't in the robe. "This is better. For both of us. I'm a teacher. I collect versions of better the way other men collect cufflinks. Better grades, better habits, better chances. It's the faith we teach to kids whose ceilings have always been described to them as floors. But this better had a different shape. Edges, price tags, a signature line. I can't afford a lawyer, I heard myself say, voice rough as a chalkboard that's seen too many explanations. Not the kind that fights. She exhaled a small laugh through her nose. Maybe she thought it was kind. You're a teacher, Marcus. You can't afford a lawyer. I felt the sentence land, felt it search the rooms of our history like a burglar deciding what to take. The basil plant on our balcony. The burnt pancake Saturdays. Theo, our lazy mutt asleep under the table. Paws twitching through some dream of simpler commands. Sit. Stay. Love. All of it seemed to shrink behind the sentence, as if you could fold a decade into one shrug. Alina, I started, and her name lifted from my mouth like something I had to let go of midair. You don't have to do it like I do, she said, almost gently. You're good, but I need more. Good. The way people say a soup is good when what they really mean is thin. I went outside with Theo to pretend the rain could argue on my behalf. The dog pressed his head to my knee, eyes the color of old coins, patient as always. I thought of my students, of Deshawn, who didn't read aloud until I told him his stutter could dance if he wanted it to. Of Mia, who wrote a sonnet about her mother's ring and how it turned green on her finger but still felt like treasure. Of Elias, who fell asleep every day until I started bringing clementines and peeling them at my desk. The room filling with a smell that meant maybe, for 15 minutes, we had invented a gentler world. Those are the things a teacher can afford. By morning, the rain was gone and Alina's robe was replaced by a blazer so crisp it might have been ironed by a verdict. She didn't make coffee. Didn't ask if I'd slept. She kissed the air near my cheek like we were two diplomats signing a treaty after a long, polite war. At school, the building welcomed me the way it always does, by asking for more. A printer blinking its red light, a door that only opens on the third try, a stack of essays that smelled faintly of the lives they were written in. I wrote "Revision is mercy" on the whiteboard in block letters and tried to believe it. But mercy, I was learning, needs representation. Mr. Reed. It was Jamal peeking around my door during lunch, clutching a newspaper that our librarian keeps for kids who want to feel old-fashioned. We got our mock trial field trip next month. You still going? Wouldn't miss it, I said. My mouth felt like it had been dusted with eraser residue. Cool, he grinned. I like the part where the lawyers stand up like they're in a rap battle. But it's all rules and objections. Structure is just choreography, I told him, hearing the sentence and realizing how badly I needed its truth. Good dancers make it look like freedom. When he left, I stared at the black rectangle of my phone. I typed free legal help and then deleted it. I typed pro bono divorce and stared at the search results long enough for the screen to dim. I thought of taking out a personal loan, but the bank would want to see certainty. And what I had was a chalk outline around a marriage still warm. I called my mother instead. She answered on the second ring with that voice that could make a grocery list sound like a hymn. Baby, you eating? Ma, I said, and my throat betrayed me. Alina filed. Silence, except for the rustle of her breath traveling the distance between us. All right, she said softly. All right. Do you have someone to speak for you? I have me. You have you, she repeated, approving but worried. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you bring a friend who knows how to make a room listen. I can't. The word lawyer snagged on my tongue. You know what my salary looks like? Your salary looks like love with a paycheck attached, she said, and I almost laughed. Call Pastor Ray. He knows people. Not the fancy kind, the kind who remember what food stamps taste like. Pastor Ray didn't pick up, so I left a message that sounded like a man reading the small print at the bottom of a contract for the first time. After work, I stopped by the church anyway. The sanctuary was empty, but for a woman arranging lilies at the altar. And the smell took me back to every wedding and funeral I've ever attended, 2 ceremonies that begin with the same flowers. Pastor's at the hospital, she said without looking up. Baby in the NICU, he'll be late. I sat in a back pew and watched the candles hum to themselves. Theo wasn't allowed in here, but I reached down for him anyway, palm finding only air. I closed my eyes and, out of somewhere not quite prayer and not quite memory, a face surfaced. A girl in a blue hoodie, hair braided close to her head, eyes so bright they could have been illegal. Senior year debate captain when I was still a teaching aide at the high school. Fast mind, faster heart. I couldn't remember her name until it arrived next to a laugh. Amaya, I said to the empty church, and the name warmed my mouth. Amaya, who'd argued a mock appellate case to a jury of restless peers and turned their restlessness into attention the way a conductor turns air into music. Amaya, who'd cried in my classroom when her mom's electricity got shut off and still took her AP exam the next day. Amaya, who once said, Mr. Reed, sometimes the world acts like a landlord, and sometimes you gotta show it your lease. I hadn't seen her in years. The last I heard, she'd gotten a scholarship to state, then disappeared into the blur where kids go when they become themselves. I went home and fed Theo and made rice and eggs because that's what you make when you need a meal that remembers you back. Alina didn't come home. A message pinged around 10, staying with Mia tonight. We'll talk this weekend. I stared at the name Mia until it became an arrangement of letters. MIA, missing in action. I slept badly and taught well. Those 2 things can coexist. Teachers make a home inside contradiction. At the end of the week, a man in a suit the exact blue of expensive confidence served me with the hearing date. I put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon because it felt right to press sour against cold. The night before the hearing, I walked Theo to the park and made a deal with the sky. Nothing big, no promises about forever or thunderbolts or miracles. I asked for one good sentence to say in the judge's direction. Something honest enough to be heard. Theo sat, then lay, then looked up at me like, I will be the sentence if you want. In the morning, I put on my best suit. It fit like a memory, snug across the shoulders, stubborn at the button. I shaved carefully and nicked myself anyway, a small bright truth blooming on my jaw. I pressed a tissue to it and thought of the kids who sit with Band-Aids on their cheeks after rough weekends, trying to pretend the adhesive isn't a flag. At the courthouse steps, I tasted all the metal in the world. Alina arrived in a gray dress that gave off the scent of clean appointments. Her attorney was a tall man with hair so precise it might have sued a comb for negligence. He shook my hand the way well-fed men have always shaken the hands of men like me, politely, pity rooting in the corners. You representing yourself, Mr. Reed? He asked, eyebrows lifting as if he'd found a typo. I am, I said. The words were steady. My hands were not. Alina's eyes softened for a moment, as if she'd discovered a bruise she didn't mean to make. Then she squared her shoulders, and that was that. We walked into the courtroom together, but not together. The benches creaked like old knees. The judge's bench was an altar to wood and patience. I sat and folded my hands and tried not to imagine my life as a spreadsheet on someone's laptop. I must have looked like a man bracing for a tide, because the bailiff, an older woman with a gold tooth that flashed like kindness, touched my shoulder as she passed and murmured, "Breathe, baby." I did, and the air remembered me. Case number 2148, the clerk called. Reed ver Reed. The judge entered, robes whispering, and everyone stood like the sea being told what to do by the moon. When we sat, I felt a change in the room. A shift you can't name until you recognize the gravity behind it, the way a classroom hushes when a favorite teacher appears in the doorway. The back doors opened again. Alina turned to glance, impatient, ready to begin. Then she saw who had just stepped inside, briefcase in one hand, eyes sweeping the room with that same fierce, generous focus I remembered from 100 years ago in a blue hoodie. She froze. I didn't. My heart stood and cheered like it was tired of sitting. "Mr. Reed?" the clerk asked, puzzled, as the woman walked briskly up the aisle, past Alina's attorney, whose smile faltered like a man sidestepping a puddle that turned out to be a pond. The woman stopped beside me and set her briefcase down with the quiet authority of a bell being rung. She turned, and there was the grin I'd seen light up debate finals. Older now, polished by law school and 1,000 long nights, but still the same engine. "Sorry I'm late," she whispered. And for a second we were back in the old auditorium with duct-taped seats and a microphone that only worked when you bullied it. "Traffic. Amaya," I breathed. She squeezed my shoulder once, quick and electric. Then she faced the bench, spine a line you could measure trust against. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady as a vow. Amaya Cole for the respondent. Alina's mouth opened without sound. The gray of her dress seemed suddenly like fog that didn't know where to go. Her attorney recovered first, rearranging his face into a courtesy smile, crafted to survive any surprise. But his eyes kept flicking toward Amaya, the way men glance at weather. The judge peered over her glasses. "Ms. Cole," she said, interest warm as sunlight on wood. "We're honored." "I'm here pro bono," Amaya said simply. "With the court's permission." The judge nodded once, and something inside me unknotted. Not like a rope being cut, but like one being patiently untangled by hands that knew how to handle what others would rather sever. Alina blinked at me. A pulse of something. Memory, regret, calculation, passing through her gaze. She'd laughed when I said I couldn't afford a lawyer. I hadn't been able to, but I had been able to afford love, and sometimes love grows up and passes the bar. Amaya placed a single sheet of paper on the table, her handwriting running across the top in bright, assertive ink. "Revision is mercy." She didn't have to say where the line came from. I looked at the judge, then at my wife, and finally at the woman who used to stand in my classroom doorway and ask whether justice was a person or a place. My hand stopped shaking. "Shall we begin?" Amaya asked, and the room listened. The first gavel strike echoed through my bones like thunder, remembering where it came from. I had thought the courtroom would feel cold, distant, a place where people wear their ruin like borrowed clothes. But sitting beside Amaya, everything around me vibrated with strange, quiet heat. Alina sat across the aisle, composed but restless. Her silver bracelet clicked against the table whenever she adjusted her papers, a small nervous metronome she probably didn't realize was betraying her. Her attorney, Mr. Dalton, whispered something to her, and she nodded too quickly, too often. I didn't look at her long. I was afraid if I did, I'd start searching for the woman who once burned pancakes on Sunday mornings and sang out of tune while washing dishes. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who looked at me like a loose end to be tied up in legal jargon. "Your Honor," Amaya began, voice calm and commanding. "Before we address the petition, I'd like to note that my client has provided financial and emotional stability throughout this marriage. The evidence will show that while Mrs. Reed seeks majority assets, she has been the higher earner for the past 5 years and has benefited disproportionately from my client's sacrifices." Her words were precise, sharp, but not cruel. There was something else beneath them, something human. Every sentence carried the weight of someone who had once stood where I sat, on the thin side of power. Dalton stood, smiling with the arrogance of a man who thought the world still ran on his clock. "Your Honor, the respondent's counsel seems to be confusing stability with complacency. My client, Mrs. Reed, has carried the bulk of their financial burden. She deserves fair compensation and a future unanchored by dependency." Amaya didn't flinch. "Dependency?" she repeated softly, her gaze steady. "Is that what we're calling loyalty now?" The courtroom murmured. Even the judge's eyebrows rose slightly. Alina's eyes flicked toward me, cold and glossy. I wondered if she had rehearsed her expressions in the mirror this morning, the same way she used to rehearse client pitches. Amaya leaned closer to me and whispered, "When they talk too loud, it's because they're afraid of silence. Let them fill the room. We'll fill the record." For the first time since the divorce began, I exhaled without trembling. When Alina took the stand, she moved like someone crossing glass, careful, deliberate. Her attorney guided her with gentle questions designed to paint her as the selfless victim, the woman who endured, supported, uplifted. And for a while it worked. Her voice trembled just enough to earn sympathy. She even managed to tear when recounting the emotional distance that had grown unbearable. But then Amaya stood. "Mrs. Reed," she began, walking slowly toward the witness stand. "You mentioned financial strain in your marriage. Could you clarify what you mean by that?" Alina nodded, recovering quickly. "Marcus's salary as a teacher wasn't enough to maintain the standard of living we'd built. I carried most of the weight." Amaya tilted her head. "Interesting. Are you referring to the home purchased with a joint mortgage, one primarily approved based on Mr. Reed's credit score?" Alina blinked. Yes, but my income." "And would it surprise you," Amaya interrupted gently, "that the court documents show your husband paid the mortgage for the first 3 years before you were even promoted?" A hush fell over the room. Dalton objected, voice cracking slightly, but the judge waved him off. Amaya smiled faintly, that same sharp glint she had when she'd out-argued entire classrooms as a teenager. "You also claimed emotional neglect, Mrs. Reed. Did Mr. Reed ever deny you support for your career?" "No," Alina said, her voice suddenly smaller. "He was encouraging." "Encouraging," Amaya repeated. "Did he attend your award dinner 2 years ago?" "Yes." "Did he drive you home that night when you had too much wine after celebrating your promotion?" "Yes." "And who stayed up with you that night when you cried about feeling unfulfilled despite the success?" Alina's composure fractured for just a second, a flicker, but unmistakable. "He did," she whispered. Amaya nodded slowly. "So, to summarize, the man you describe as a burden was the same man holding your world steady when you couldn't." Dalton shifted, papers rustling nervously. The judge scribbled something down, the faint scrape of pen on paper slicing through the silence. I couldn't move. My chest ached in that strange, heavy way that comes when the truth finally starts breathing again. Amaya continued, her tone softening. "Mrs. Reed, one last question. You said you laughed when Mr. Reed said he couldn't afford a lawyer. Why?" Alina's eyes darted toward me, full of heat and shame and something else, memory. "I didn't mean it like that. I thought he'd give up." The room stilled. Amaya took a single step closer. "He doesn't give up, Mrs. Reed. He teaches kids who live on the edge of giving up. Every day he shows them what it looks like to stand up without armor." I had to look down. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was relief. The judge called for a recess. Alina brushed past me on her way out, her perfume a sharp ghost. For a heartbeat, her hand twitched like she might reach out. But she didn't. Amaya turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded, though my throat was thick. "How did you remember?" She smiled. "You once told me words can save people." I decided to prove it. We stepped outside. Sunlight breaking through the clouds like the world had been waiting for a verdict of its own. She handed me a paper cup of coffee from the vending machine, the kind that tastes like cardboard and burnt hope. "Somehow it was perfect, Amaya," I said quietly. "Why are you doing this for me?" Her eyes softened, but her smile stayed firm. "Because when I was 17, you gave me the words to fight. Now it's my turn to hand them back." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. The breeze carried the scent of rain and coffee and something new I hadn't felt in months. The beginning of peace. But peace, I would soon learn, doesn't last long when truth starts pulling back the curtain. Because what Amaya said next changed everything. She took a slow sip, watching Alina's attorney pace on the courthouse steps, phone pressed to his ear. Then she said, almost to herself, "Marcus, you didn't hear this from me yet, but someone's been lying under oath. And I can prove it." The word lying didn't sound real when Amaya said it. It rolled off her tongue like a rumor you don't want to believe, but deep down, you already know it's true. I stared at her, the courthouse crowd buzzing behind us, lawyers, clerks, broken people holding folders full of heartbreak. "What do you mean lying?" I asked quietly. Amaya glanced around before speaking. Her financial disclosure. Something doesn't add up. Either her income's been underreported or there's a second account she didn't declare. I ran a quick look through public records last night after you called me. My pulse jumped. "You did all that in one night?" She shrugged with that fierce grin I remembered from her debate days. "You taught me how to prepare for a fight before it starts." Then her tone changed, serious now. Marcus, if I can prove she falsified her statement, the court won't just dismiss her demands. They might penalize her. I felt dizzy. It wasn't victory I felt. Not yet. It was disbelief, the kind that lives in people who've forgotten what fairness looks like. How sure are you? I asked. 80%. She paused. But that 20%, that's the dangerous part. If I'm wrong, it could backfire. I looked at her and said the first honest thing that came to me. Do it. She smiled like she'd been waiting to hear that. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that remembers laughter. Theo lay beside me, tail twitching whenever thunder rolled in the distance. I watched the lightning flash across the ceiling and thought about all the years Alina and I had spent trying to build something worth protecting. The worst part of losing someone isn't when they leave. It's when you realize they'd already left long before the door closed. At around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Amaya. Got it. Found the second account. Meet me at 8 a.m., Courthouse Cafe. Morning came with the taste of cold coffee and adrenaline. When I met her, she was already sitting at a small corner table with her laptop open and her blazer off, sleeves rolled up like she was about to rebuild the world. Her company issues bonuses through a private branch, not payroll, not taxed. The same way, Amaya explained, sliding her laptop toward me. She received 2 lump sums last year that don't appear anywhere in her declared income. She's been siphoning it into a personal account. I stared at the screen. There it was. A. Reed. Deposits from a corporate fund labeled Client Acquisition Bonus. I felt something between anger and sadness crawl up my spine. She lied under oath, I said. Amaya nodded, and she tried to bury it. But this, she tapped the screen. This is the kind of lie that burns itself alive when the truth shows up. We sat there for a moment, the noise of the Courthouse Cafe fading behind the rush of everything that was about to happen. Are you sure you want to use it? She asked. It'll destroy her case, maybe her job. I looked down at my hands, calloused from years of writing red marks on essays, carrying boxes, fixing broken desks, hands that built a life around kindness. I don't want revenge, I said. I just want her to stop pretending she's the victim. Amaya nodded once, eyes glinting with respect. Then let's end this properly. Court resumed that afternoon. Alina looked calmer, even smug, as if the earlier cracks in her story had been plastered over by Dalton's confidence. He whispered to her as the judge entered, smiling that same smile I'd seen too many times, the smile of a man who thought he'd already won. Amaya stood first. Your Honor, she said, voice steady as a sermon. We'd like to submit additional evidence regarding the petitioner's financial statements. Dalton laughed under his breath. Your Honor, this is improper. We've already overruled. The judge interrupted. Let her proceed. Amaya clicked the remote and the screen lit up with numbers, charts, transactions, truth in pixels. The petitioner claimed her annual income was $89,000. We've located additional deposits totaling nearly $62,000, paid through a private channel belonging to her employer. The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites rooms. Alina froze. Dalton leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That's circumstantial, he said quickly. There's no proof those funds are personal. Amaya smiled faintly, the way a teacher smiles before revealing an answer the whole class missed. Actually, there is. She picked up a paper from the table. The account registration lists the petitioner's full legal name and social security number. The deposits are categorized under performance bonuses for her signature client acquisitions. The judge leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Reed, is this accurate? Alina's voice cracked. I didn't think I had to disclose that. It's separate. It's income, the judge replied. And concealing it is a violation of this court's disclosure policy. Dalton started to speak, but the judge raised a hand. Save it. We'll take a 15-minute recess. When the gavel struck again, it didn't sound like thunder this time. It sounded like justice. We stepped into the hallway, and Alina was already there, pacing, phone in hand, whispering furiously. Her eyes met mine for a split second, all the sharpness gone, replaced by something almost childlike. Fear. "Marcus," she said, voice trembling. "You don't have to do this. We can settle." I swallowed hard. "You already tried to settle when you lied." She looked away, lips pressed tight. "I just wanted what was fair." "So did I said. "You just didn't want to share the meaning of it." Amaya stood beside me, arms crossed, silent but powerful, like the truth itself standing guard. Alina turned to her, eyes wet now. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Amaya's voice softened. "You think this is about enjoyment? You tried to break a man who taught kids how to stand when they fall. You wanted to humiliate him. Now you're learning how it feels to sit in your own shadow." The hallway went quiet again. When the judge returned, the decision came swiftly. The house would remain in my name. The savings would be split evenly. Alimony was denied due to false statements. The gavel fell one last time. Alina didn't look at me as she left, just walked out into the sunlight like someone stepping into exile. Outside, Amaya and I stood on the courthouse steps, the sky wide and clean. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "You just changed my life." She smiled gently. "No, Marcus. You changed mine a long time ago. I just returned the favor." Theo barked from the car, tail wagging against the window. Amaya laughed. "He remembers me." I grinned, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Real peace. "He remembers everyone who was kind." She handed me a file folder, her work neatly organized inside. "Keep this. You'll need it for the final paperwork." As she started to leave, I called out, "Amaya." She turned, the wind lifting a strand of her hair. "Why did you really come back?" I asked. Her eyes softened. "Because you once told me every story deserves a second draft. This was yours." And with that, she walked away, not like someone leaving, but like someone setting something free. I stood there watching her disappear into the sunlight, and for the first time in years I felt something bigger than pain. Not revenge, not victory, redemption. The next morning, sunlight finally looked like sunlight again. Not a spotlight on failure, not a cruel reminder of what used to be, but something alive. Something warm. I stood on the porch with Theo at my feet, a mug of coffee in my hand, and for the first time in months I didn't feel the need to rehearse my breathing. The storm had passed, at least the kind that makes your chest ache every time you remember a laugh that isn't yours anymore. But peace, I soon learned, comes with its own kind of silence, one that asks, "Now what?" The world didn't pause for my redemption. Bills still waited, classes still needed grading, students still asked if Romeo was dumb for dying for love, and the dog still barked at every mail carrier who dared approach. Life, in its unflinching simplicity, demanded participation. I tried. I threw myself into my work. I stayed late, coached the debate team, fixed the broken whiteboard that had been haunting my classroom since spring. Yet every time I packed up for the night, the quiet followed me home like a ghost that refused to leave. I hadn't heard from Alina since the hearing. No calls, no texts, just silence. Part of me wanted to reach out, not for reconciliation, but for closure. But another part, the one that still felt raw and breathing, knew better. Some doors should stay closed even when the handle tempts you. Then one afternoon, as I sat in the staff lounge correcting essays, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number. You ruined me." I stared at the screen. The words felt like cold hands around my throat. It had to be her. A second message followed. "Hope you're happy, Marcus." "They fired me." I set the phone down. My heart thudded like I'd run a race I never signed up for. I didn't reply. What could I even say? She'd lied, and she'd paid the price for it. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. Theo nudged my leg, eyes soft, like he understood that justice doesn't always taste sweet. That night, I sat on the couch, phone face down, staring at the old wedding photo still sitting on the shelf. We looked so young there, so sure. Love had been our favorite subject back then, until life gave us the final exam and neither of us studied for it. 2 days later, Amaya called. "Marcus, you okay?" she asked. Her voice carried that calm authority that could turn chaos into clarity. "Yeah," I said quietly. "She texted me. I figured she might," Amaya sighed. Dalton filed to withdraw from representation. She's under review for falsifying records at her firm. They're making an example of her. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. That wasn't what I wanted. I know, she said. But the truth doesn't wait for permission to show up. We were silent for a while, just breathing on opposite ends of the line. Then she added softly, "You did the right thing, even when it hurt." Her words lingered long after we hung up. Weeks passed. Life began to rebuild itself in slow, careful steps. Amaya started visiting the school sometimes, volunteering for mock trial workshops. The kids adored her. Watching her guide them, calm, fierce, funny, I realized she had inherited everything I'd ever tried to teach: patience, compassion, and that fire that refuses to dim in the face of injustice. One afternoon, after the kids left, we stood by the chalkboard together. "You were always meant for this," I said. She smiled. "I had a good teacher." There was a quiet moment then, the kind that lives between gratitude and something unspoken. The air shifted just slightly, and I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Warmth that wasn't just professional. But I looked away. The wounds weren't ready for new names yet. That night I drove past Alina's old office building. Her name had been removed from the directory. The parking spot that once carried her initials was empty. The world moves fast when it decides to forget you. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe curiosity, maybe guilt. I sat there for a few minutes, headlights dimmed, and thought about the woman I used to love, the one who danced barefoot in our kitchen, the one who called me her calm in the storm. I realized something then. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done carrying a ghost. When I got home, I took off my wedding ring, the one I'd kept tucked in a drawer since the hearing, and placed it on the counter. Not in anger, just in peace. A few weeks later, Amaya and I met for lunch. She wore a simple navy dress, no blazer this time. Her laughter came easier now, softer around the edges. "You look lighter," she said as we sat down. "I feel it," I admitted. "It's strange. For years I thought the end of my marriage was the end of me. Turns out it was just the end of a chapter I'd already outgrown." She nodded. "Sometimes we mistake comfort for happiness." "You taught me that when I was 16, I smiled. "I did?" "Yeah," she said, sipping her tea. "You told me once that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just looks like showing up again." I chuckled. Sounds like something a tired teacher would say. Or a wise one. The air between us softened, familiar but different now. She looked at me in a way that didn't demand anything. No promises, no confessions. Just presence. Later that evening, as I drove home, the sunset painted the sky in colors I hadn't noticed in months. Amber, rose, gold. The kind of sky that makes you believe endings can be beautiful too. When I got home, I opened the window and let the wind fill the room. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt honest. Then I saw it, an envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a single folded note. "I'm sorry. I lost everything trying to win against you. Maybe someday you'll forgive me." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature. I folded it once, slid it into a drawer, and whispered into the quiet. I already did. Theo rested his head on my lap, and for the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was healing. A week later, Amaya texted me, "Coffee tomorrow? Or dinner if you're brave." I smiled, really smiled. Maybe some stories don't end at all. Maybe they just start telling the truth. It started with coffee, the kind that tastes ordinary but carries the weight of something unspoken. Amaya sat across from me in a small cafe that smelled of cinnamon and second chances. The morning light hit her hair just right, a streak of gold running through the dark. She was scrolling through her phone, probably pretending to read emails so I wouldn't see her glancing at me between sips. "Dinner would have been safer," I teased. She smiled. "Dinner's too formal." "Coffee's honest." "Honest." She nodded. No candlelight, no expectations. Just caffeine and truth. I couldn't argue with that. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what was right in front of me. The conversation flowed like it always had between us. Easy, unforced. We talked about her cases, my students, and even Theo, who had apparently become a minor celebrity among her law firm colleagues thanks to the photos I'd posted of him helping grade papers. But somewhere between laughter and the soft clink of coffee mugs, the talk shifted. You ever wonder why some people love destruction? I asked quietly. Amaya tilted her head. You mean like your ex-wife? I nodded. Yeah, it's like... She didn't just want out. She wanted me to feel small for being left. She sighed, eyes thoughtful. People like that don't destroy because they hate you. They destroy because they hate seeing someone survive without them. That sentence stayed with me long after we left the cafe. The next few weeks became something I hadn't expected. A rhythm. Amaya and I started meeting more often. Coffee, lunch, sometimes a walk around the park with Theo. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was two people learning how to exist beside each other without pretending they weren't broken. She told me about her childhood, the nights her mom worked double shifts, the fear of eviction, the way she used to sleep with her shoes on, just in case. I told her about teaching, about how sometimes a kid's silence says more than any essay ever could. Somewhere in those talks, something began to heal. Then one evening, as I was locking up my classroom, the janitor handed me a small envelope. Some lady dropped this off, he said. Said you'd know what it's about. Inside was a check, no note. No explanation, made out to me for $25,000. I froze. The signature at the bottom was shaky, but unmistakable. Alina, I called Amaya immediately. She's trying to fix it. Amaya said after a long pause. It's guilt money. I don't want it, I said quickly. It feels wrong, I know. But maybe it's not about the money. Maybe it's her way of saying she finally looked in the mirror. I hesitated. Should I cash it? Amaya's voice softened. No, frame it. It's proof that you won without losing yourself. A few days later, Alina showed up at the school. I was in the middle of grading essays when the receptionist buzzed me. There's a Mrs. Reed here to see you. It took me a second to realize she still carried my last name. When she walked in, she looked different. Not polished, not proud. Just human. Tired. The kind of tired that sits in your bones. Marcus, she said, voice trembling. I needed to apologize in person. I set down my pen. You don't owe me that. Yes, I do, she whispered. I thought I was proving something. That I was strong. That I deserved more. But the truth is I was just scared. You were constant, and I confused stability with weakness. Her eyes filled, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who betrayed me. I saw the woman who once danced barefoot in our kitchen, trying to drown her fears in laughter. I lost everything, she said softly. The job, the apartment, my name means nothing in that world now. I sighed. Alina, I don't hate you. Her eyes widened, like she wasn't prepared for grace. I did, I continued, for a while. But hate doesn't hold people accountable. It just keeps them stuck. We both made mistakes. We both lost sight of what mattered. She nodded slowly, tears falling now. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I said gently. But I'm giving it anyway. She smiled weakly, the kind of smile that's equal parts sorrow and gratitude. Then she handed me a small envelope. There's a letter inside. Read it when you're ready. When she left, the air in the room felt lighter. Not because she was gone, but because something heavy had finally been set down. That night I opened the envelope. Inside was a single line written in her handwriting. You were the home I left searching for. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a book on my shelf. To Kill a Mockingbird, the one I used. To teach her about empathy years ago, when she'd first sat in the back of my classroom helping me grade, Theo jumped on the couch beside me, tail wagging, eyes soft. I rubbed his head and whispered, I think we're finally free, buddy. The next day, Amaya stopped by my classroom again. The kids had already left, and the sunset spilled gold across the desks. You look different, she said, smiling. Peaceful. Maybe because I finally forgave the right person, I said. Her? No, I said quietly. Myself. She looked at me for a long moment, then stepped closer. You know, Marcus, life has a strange sense of timing. How so? She smiled. When I was a kid, you taught me to believe in myself. Now I'm teaching you to believe again. In love, in people, in yourself. The silence between us was gentle, not awkward. She reached out, brushed her fingers against my hand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was simple, like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. I didn't pull away. Outside, the first stars began to show. The world kept turning, steady and new. And for the first time in years, I wasn't scared of what came next. They say healing doesn't make a sound, but that's not true. It whispers. It hums softly in the background when the pain starts to loosen its grip, when laughter sneaks back into rooms that once only held echoes. It sounded like that now, faint, steady, somewhere between Amaya's laugh and the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. It had been 3 months since the trial ended, and life had found a new rhythm. I taught during the day, worked on lesson plans at night, and spent weekends at the park with Theo, sometimes alone, sometimes with Amaya. What used to be a life of routine now felt like a life of choice. Amaya had become a fixture, but never a replacement. She didn't try to fill the spaces Alina had left. She simply walked beside them, letting them exist until they didn't need to anymore. One Saturday afternoon, she stopped by with 2 cups of coffee and a mischievous grin. "Don't tell me you're grading papers again," she teased, glancing at the stack of essays on my table. "Old habits die hard," I said, smiling, "and my students keep trying to convince me that TikTok counts as literary influence." She laughed, that full, sincere kind of laugh that warmed every corner of the room. Maybe they're right. Maybe we're the ones too scared to see poetry where it hides. "Poetry on TikTok," I said, pretending to think. "That's how civilizations fall." She threw a crumpled napkin at me, and for the first time in years, I laughed without hesitation. Not because something was funny, but because it felt safe to. As weeks passed, our connection deepened quietly, naturally. It wasn't the kind of love that rushes in like a flood. It was the slow kind, the kind that grows in the cracks after the storm has passed. She never asked about Alina unless I brought her up. When I did, she listened, really listened, without trying to fix anything. That's how I knew she understood, the kind of healing that doesn't need noise to prove it exists. One evening as we walked through the park, she asked, "Do you ever miss her?" I thought about it. "Sometimes," I said honestly. Not who she became, who she was when we still believed in forever. "That's not wrong," Amaya said softly. "Missing doesn't mean you want them back. It means you still honor the part of you that loved." I looked at her then, at the way the light from the street lamps caught her eyes. "Do you always have to sound like a therapist?" She smiled. "Only when the patient's stubborn." Theo barked once, as if agreeing. A few days later, I received an email from Alina. No anger, no demands, just a single line. "Thank you for not hating me." That was all, but it felt like a door closing softly, not slammed. I didn't reply. Some chapters deserved to end in quiet. Spring came early that year. The school hosted its annual open house, and Amaya volunteered to speak to the students about law and leadership. I stood in the back of the auditorium, watching her command the room, confident, articulate, magnetic. She looked up once and caught my eye. For a second her voice faltered, not in weakness, but in recognition. There was something new in her gaze that hadn't been there before. Warmth that wasn't borrowed, care that wasn't professional. After her talk, the students swarmed her with questions. I waited until the crowd thinned, then walked over. "You were incredible," I said. She shrugged. "I had a good teacher once. Still blaming me for your success, huh?" Her grin widened. "Absolutely." For a heartbeat, we just stood there. 2 people who had once been student and mentor, now standing as equals in the middle of a life neither of us expected. "Come to dinner tonight," she said suddenly. "My place. I'm cooking." I raised an eyebrow. "Should I bring a fire extinguisher?" She laughed. "Bring dessert instead." Her apartment was simple but full of life, books stacked on every surface, candles that smelled like citrus and ink, photos of her mother, and a painting of a sunrise that looked handmade. Dinner was chaos, pasta sauce splattering on the counter, Theo sneaking bites under the table, Amaya laughing as she nearly burned the garlic bread, but it was perfect in its imperfection. Halfway through, she poured us both a glass of wine. "To new drafts," she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers. "To revisions that save us." We drank, and for a moment the world shrank to just the sound of our glasses meeting, the warmth of her hand brushing mine, and the realization that I didn't need to run from the past anymore. After dinner, we sat on the balcony. The city glowed below us, small and fragile and alive. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You ever think about how strange life is?" "All the time. Like, maybe everything falls apart so better things can find us." I looked at her, the reflection of the streetlights dancing in her eyes. "Maybe it's not about better things," I said softly. "Maybe it's about better hearts." She smiled, and in that moment, I knew something had shifted. Not forced, not fast, but right. A week later, I found a small envelope in my school mailbox. No name, just my initials written in looping handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a newspaper clipping, an article about Alina volunteering at a women's shelter, helping others rebuild their lives. I sat there for a while, staring at her photo, tired, older, but smiling. It didn't hurt to see her anymore. It felt like closure had finally exhaled. I sent the clipping to Amaya later that night with a text. "Looks like everyone gets a second draft." She replied, "You taught her that too, Marcus." And for once I believed it. Later that evening, I stood outside under the stars, Theo sitting at my feet, Amaya's laughter still echoing in my mind. I realized something that night. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bleeding. As the wind moved through the trees, I whispered to the dark, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to the universe that somehow turned my humiliation into healing. I went inside, turned off the lights, and let the quiet rest beside me. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt whole. When life starts healing, it doesn't announce itself. There's no grand trumpet, no fireworks, no cinematic music rising in the background. It just starts to breathe again, softly, silently, like a wound that's learning the language of light. That was my life now. Slow, ordinary, beautiful. The kind of life I used to think was too quiet for me. It had been nearly a year since the court case ended. The house, once filled with echoes of anger, now smelled of coffee and dog treats. Theo had claimed half the couch, and the other half was a battlefield between books and blankets. Sometimes, when the afternoon light hit just right, the air itself seemed peaceful, like the house was finally resting too. But peace doesn't mean the story is over. It just means the next chapter has softer edges, and this chapter had a name, Amaya. She'd become my constant. Not in the possessive way that people use the word when they need someone to fill their emptiness, but in the way sunlight keeps showing up whether you notice it or not. We never declared anything. There was no "are we together" moment, no candlelit confession. It just happened, naturally, gently, like a tide returning to the shore that always waited for it. One evening, after grading essays, I looked up to find her asleep on the couch, Theo curled up beside her. Her head rested against his back, one hand loosely holding the red pen she'd borrowed to help me mark papers. The sight hit me with an ache so deep it felt like prayer. That's when I knew. Love isn't a thunderstorm. It's a heartbeat you almost forget to notice. The following week, we attended a teachers' charity gala downtown, an event meant to raise funds for underprivileged schools. I was one of the coordinators, and Amaya had volunteered to handle the legal paperwork for donations. She arrived in a deep emerald dress, simple yet devastatingly elegant, and for a second, every word I'd ever taught my students vanished from memory. "You clean up well." "Mr. Reed," she teased, adjusting my tie. "And you," I said, struggling for composure, "make it hard to remember how to breathe." She rolled her eyes, smiling. "Don't start turning this into one of your essays." But when we entered the hall, everyone noticed her, not just because she was beautiful, but because she carried herself with the kind of confidence that made people listen. Watching her move through the room, shaking hands, smiling warmly, explaining things in that calm, steady tone, I realized how proud I was of her. At one point, she found me near the refreshments table, nursing a cup of punch. "You've been avoiding the dance floor," she said. "I teach Shakespeare," I replied. "I'm allergic to rhythm," she laughed. "Come on, Marcus. Just one dance." And so we did. Slow, clumsy, awkward. But when her hand found mine and her head rested lightly against my shoulder, the rest of the room disappeared. I thought of the man who once stood in court, terrified and alone. I thought of the laughter that used to sting, the humiliation that used to burn. Then I looked down at Amaya and realized I was no longer that man. Later that night, when I dropped her home, she didn't move to get out of the car. Instead, she looked at me quietly for a long moment. "Do you ever think about the what-ifs?" she asked softly. "Every day," I admitted. "But I think the right what-ifs find us anyway, just at the wrong time first." She smiled, and the silence between us stretched like a heartbeat before she leaned forward and kissed me. Soft, unhurried, deliberate. It wasn't the kind of kiss that begged for more. It was the kind that said, "This is safe. This is home." When she pulled away, her voice was barely a whisper. "You're not just my past, Marcus. You're my peace." I didn't reply. Words would have ruined the moment. Days passed into weeks. The seasons began to shift, and with them, something inside me began to change too. For the first time since my divorce, I wasn't waiting for pain to come back. I wasn't rehearsing heartbreak. I was simply living. Then one afternoon I received an unexpected email from the state's education board. They wanted to nominate me for a Teacher Impact Award, a recognition for educators who had influenced community growth. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. When I told Amaya, she looked like she'd just been handed the winning ticket at a lottery. "Marcus, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because it's probably a mistake," I said. She crossed her arms. "You really are impossible. Let me guess. You think your kindness doesn't count as achievement?" I laughed. I never did it for recognition." "Exactly," she said, grinning. "That's why you deserve it." The award ceremony was set for the following month. The auditorium was filled with teachers, principals, families, and students. I'd expected it to be a formal, dull affair, but it turned into something else entirely when I saw half my students show up with handmade banners. "We love Mr. Reed." "Revision is mercy." "Best teacher alive." My throat tightened. When my name was announced, the applause was so loud I thought I'd imagined it. I walked onto the stage, blinking under the lights, my heart thundering. The host handed me the plaque, smiling. "Mr. Reed, you've been nominated for your impact both inside and outside the classroom. One of your students wrote this in their letter. He doesn't just teach lessons, he lives them." The crowd clapped again, and when I looked down, Amaya was in the front row, eyes bright with pride. I smiled. Not for the camera, not for the stage, but for her. When I gave my short speech, I didn't talk about success or effort. I talked about grace, about how sometimes the greatest lesson isn't about how to win, but how to lose without losing yourself. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Amaya came up and threw her arms around me. "You did it," she said, voice muffled against my chest. "We did it," I corrected. "You showed me that revision isn't just for stories, it's for people too." Later that night, we sat together on the porch of my house, watching the stars emerge. The air smelled faintly of rain. "Do you ever think about fate?" she asked. "Only when it feels like mercy," I said. She looked at me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Then I guess mercy brought me here." I reached for her hand. "And grace let me keep you." The world felt quiet, not empty, just calm. The kind of quiet that comes when the storm finally accepts it can't win. A few weeks later, as I was leaving school, I saw someone waiting near the gates, a familiar figure, standing with a hesitant smile. "Alina?" I said, stopping in surprise. She looked healthier, softer somehow. "Hi, Marcus." "I saw the article," I said. "The shelter work, that's good." She nodded. "It's hard work, but it feels honest." There was no bitterness between us anymore, just the echo of something that once mattered deeply. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "For not fighting dirty, for letting me find my own way back." "You did that yourself," I said. She smiled, a small, genuine smile. "You're happy, aren't you?" "I am," she nodded, eyes glistening. "Good. You always deserved to be." And then she was gone, walking down the street into a future that no longer belonged to me, and that was okay. Some stories aren't meant to return. They're meant to release. That night, Amaya came over, and I told her about the meeting. Closure, she said softly. Yeah, I whispered. Real closure this time. She rested her head against me, and I realized something profound. Forgiveness doesn't always arrive as a feeling. Sometimes it's just the quiet acceptance that the past has no more control. The world outside hummed with the rhythm of night. Crickets, wind, distant laughter from a neighbor's porch. Amaya looked up at me, eyes soft. So what's next for Marcus Reed? I smiled. Maybe I'll write again. Maybe I'll finally start that book my students keep pestering me about. About what? About second drafts, I said. And how sometimes they're better than the first. She laughed, the sound mixing with the night air, and for the first time I understood what peace truly meant. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was waking up every morning beside someone who didn't need to be perfect, just present. And this time, I wasn't the man left behind. I was the man who stayed standing. My wife wanted a divorce and laughed because I had no lawyer. But in court, she froze Part 8, final. It's strange how endings don't really announce themselves. There's no dramatic music, no slow fade to black. Just a quiet realization, somewhere in the middle of an ordinary morning, that the pain that used to own you doesn't live here anymore. That morning began like any other. Theo barked at the mail carrier, the kettle whistled, and sunlight crept through the blinds with the easy confidence of something that knew it was welcome. I poured coffee, fed the dog, and sat by my desk. The same old desk that once held divorce papers and sleepless nights. Now it held something else. A manuscript, Revision is Mercy, by Marcus Reed. It was done, all 283 pages of it. My story, but not just mine. A story about loss, forgiveness, and finding purpose again. About a man who walked through fire, thinking it would end him, only to realize it forged him instead. The dedication read, "For the students who kept me standing, and for the woman who reminded me that mercy is love, even when it hurts." That woman, of course, was Amaya. I hadn't planned to publish it. Writing was therapy, but Amaya had other ideas. "This isn't just your story," she'd said, eyes shining. "It's for everyone who thinks survival is the same as living." And she was right. So here I was, staring at an email from a small publishing house that had loved the manuscript and wanted to sign it. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from awe. Before I could even think, Theo barked twice, the signal that someone was at the door. When I opened it, there she was, Amaya, holding 2 cups of coffee and that smile that had quietly rewritten my life. "You look like you just saw a ghost," she said. Stepping in. "Not a ghost," I said, smiling. "A miracle." I handed her the email. She read it, her eyes widening. "Marcus, this is huge!" "I know, it doesn't even feel real." "It's real," she said, setting down the coffee. "You earned this. Every word, every scar, every lesson. This," she pointed at the manuscript, "isn't about your ex-wife. It's about you finding your way home." I felt my throat tighten. "Home," I repeated quietly. She nodded, stepping closer. "Yeah, and you built it yourself." The book came out 6 months later. It didn't break sales records, but it broke hearts, in the best way. Letters poured in from teachers, single parents, divorcees, and even students who said it made them believe again in something bigger than failure. People saw themselves in my pain. They saw hope in my forgiveness, and through it all, Amaya was there, not as my savior, but as my partner. We didn't rush into marriage or declarations or labels. We just lived. She had her career, I had my classroom, and together we built something that felt sacred. Not flashy, not loud, just honest. One day, during a local book signing, a woman approached me in line. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with silver. Her eyes carried time, but also peace. "Alina," I said softly. She smiled, a real one this time. "Congratulations, Marcus. The book is beautiful." "Thank you," I said, and for once there was no awkwardness, no tension, just 2 people who had finally let each other go. She hesitated, then added, "I'm getting remarried. His name's Daniel. He's kind," I smiled. "I'm happy for you." Her eyes softened. "You really are, aren't you?" "I am." She reached into her purse, pulled out a worn bookmark, the same one I'd once given her years ago with a quote from Hemingway. "The world breaks everyone, and afterwards some are strong at the broken places." "I kept it," she said. "I finally understand it now." She placed it on the table beside my stack of books and walked away. I watched her go, and this time I didn't feel loss. I felt completion. That night, Amaya and I sat by the fire, the dog curled up between us, the house glowing in soft lamplight. She traced the rim of her coffee cup, smiling faintly. You know, when I was 16, I thought life was a race. Win fast, love fast, succeed fast. But watching you, I learned it's okay to grow slow, I laughed. That's funny, because when I was 30, I thought my life was over. Turns out it was just paused for editing. She leaned against me. Best revision I've ever read. We sat there in silence, listening to the fire crackle. The wind brushed the windows, whispering the same thing it always does to those who finally made it through. You survived. After a while, I said, do you ever think about how everything had to fall apart just right for us to end up here? Yeah, she murmured. I think about it all the time. I kissed her forehead. Then I guess we should be grateful for the wreckage. Months later, the school invited me to speak at graduation. I stood before hundreds of students, faces full of wonder and fear, and I told them what no textbook could. Life will break you, I said. People will disappoint you. You'll lose things you thought you couldn't live without. But if you can face that pain without bitterness, if you can learn to forgive even when it hurts, you won't just survive. You'll grow. And one day you'll look back and realize the pain was just love trying to come back home. The auditorium erupted in applause. But it was one face I looked for in the crowd, Amaya's. She was standing near the back, smiling, tears glistening. And in that moment, I knew everything I'd endured, every betrayal, every sleepless night, every broken dream, had led me right there. To her. To peace, to purpose that night. We went home and danced in the kitchen. No music, no rhythm, just us, moving slowly to the heartbeat of something bigger. Theo barked once as if to bless the moment, and the world outside went on, ordinary and infinite. I looked at her, my heart steady and full, and whispered, You know what's funny? What? I used to think my story ended in that courtroom. Turns out that was just the prologue. She laughed softly. Then what's this? I pulled her closer. The sequel. And as we danced, the teacher and the lawyer, the broken and the healed, the once and the forever, I realized something simple, something true. Love doesn't return to the same address. It finds you where you finally start living again. 2 years later, Revision is Mercy became part of the state's education curriculum for senior English. I received a letter from one of my students who'd read it. Mr. Reed, I didn't know teachers could be heroes until I read your book. Thank you for showing me that even broken stories can have beautiful endings. I smiled when I read it, closed the book on my desk, and whispered to the boy I once was, the man I became, and the woman who helped me find my way. Every ending is just a second draft waiting to be written. And this time I didn't need to revise a single word.